Go up and down the streets of Jerusalem. Look around and consider. Search through her squares. If you can find but one person who deals honestly and seeks the truth, I will forgive this city. Although they say, as surely as the Lord lives, and they are swearing falsely, Lord, do not your eyes look for truth? You struck them, but they felt no pain. You crushed them, but they refused correction. They made their faces harder than stone and refused to repent. I thought, these are only the poor. They are foolish. All right. Sorry, my program crashed, so Dave, if you could finish that when you start your sermon, that would be great. It's a team effort here, guys.
In Jeremiah chapter 5, as Jeremiah is continuing to speak to the people of Israel, he says, these are only the poor, he says, they are foolish, for they do not know the way of the Lord, the requirements of their God. So, I will go to leaders to speak to them. Surely they know the way of the Lord, the requirements of their God. But with one accord, they too had broken off the yoke and torn off the bonds. Therefore, a lion from the forest will attack them, a wolf from the desert will ravage them, a leopard will lie in wait near their towns, to tear to pieces anyone who ventures out. For their rebellion is great and their backslidings many. Why should I forgive you? Your children have forsaken me and sworn by gods that are not gods. I supplied all their needs, yet they committed adultery and thronged to the houses of prostitutes. They're well-fed, lusty stallions, each neighing for another man's wife. Should I not punish them for this, declares the Lord? Should I not avenge myself on such a nation as this? And this is what he said. Go through the vineyards and ravage them. But do not destroy them completely, but strip off her branches, for these people do not belong to the Lord. The house of Israel and the house of Judah have been utterly unfaithful to me. Ouch. Those are some powerful words, aren't they? Do you realize that 800 years before Jeremiah spoke this to the people of Israel, Moses, right before he gave instructions to Joshua to lead them into the promised land, we read back in the Old Testament about Moses' song that he sang. And these are the words that he prophesied in his song from Deuteronomy 32. He said, their vine comes from the vine of Sodom and from the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are filled with poison and their clusters with bitterness. Their wine is the venom of serpents, the deadly poison of cobras. Jeremiah was speaking in relationship. Don't wake the baby. Jeremiah was speaking in relationship as an unfortunate fulfillment of Moses' pronouncement of the people of Israel were connected to an evil vine. And therefore, everything that came from them was evil. And it came to fruition, pardon the pun, in the days of Jeremiah when the people had finally turned away from God. Remember before, quick history lesson. You ready for the fast history lesson? Put on your tennis shoes. Here we go. All right? Saul, first king of Israel, right? Then we have David. Then we have Solomon. Kingdom split into two. We have the northern kingdom Israel, southern kingdom Judah. Northern kingdom Israel, all evil, so God punished them. Took them away. Scattered throughout the world. Okay? Second, you have the kingdom of Judah, the two tribes that were left, that were faithful for a time. They had some good kings, some bad kings. Well, they finally had too many bad kings, and God says at the time of Jeremiah, Isaiah, and those prophets together, and he says, I'm going to take you into captivity. And then we have Daniel for 70 years, remember, in Babylon. They finally get to come back with Zerubbabel and them. So that's your real quick history lesson. Did you get all that right down? Okay. We're at the time in this process in which now Judah, the southern kingdom, has got so evil that God is going to punish them. Because they have been connecting themselves to the wrong vine. They have been then producing evil in their lives to the point in which God is now going to strip the vine clean. And that's what Moses had talked about in his song 800 years before this. Interestingly enough, Jesus in the temple is now dealing with people who are attached to the same evil vine. But he says to his disciples, those that would follow him, in John chapter 15, Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it'll be even more fruitful. And he says to his disciples, who then would become his apostles, he said, now you're already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. So remain in me also, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. See, I am the vine, Jesus says. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you're like the branch. You're like the branch, remember? The branch, back in Jeremiah's day, you're like the branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. See, Jesus read his Old Testament history because he wrote it. And all of the plans of God, all of the things that God desires to do is laid out through history. And it all finds its center in Jesus Christ. So now he says to his disciples, I am the true vine. To say he's the true vine, recognize that there are false vines. There are vines out there like Israel used to follow that he described as vines that find their source in things like Sodom and Gomorrah, and that's never a good thing. Right? I'll give you some examples of modern day false vines. I knew this fella at one time who loved to skydive. That was his thing. Once he discovered it at the age of 65, got his 100 jumps in like 3 years. His seemingly sole purpose was to get as many people to jump out of an airplane with him. And he's been a Christian all his life. And he brought more people into an airplane than he brought into the kingdom. He says, I'm going to send them to heaven one way or the other. Shoot, don't open them. No. He used to joke. But what happened is his interest became so strong, he became so driven by this part of his life, the thing of this world, whatever it might have been. It happened to be skydiving. He became so sold on it and so driven by it that he couldn't help but to exude skydiving and try to draw as many people in as he could to skydiving. Guess where he was tapping, guess what vine he was tapping into? Guess what fruit he bore? You say, well, I don't have any problem with skydiving, so I haven't tapped into that one. I know some other folks nowadays whose whole life is surrounded by fantasy football. Anybody know a fantasy footballer? And it has literally taken over their life. Maybe they're going, I don't even like regular football. I like fantasy football. But there are those who now have got so involved in fantasy football that it consumes their whole world. If you go look at their computer screen at work, when nobody's looking, you see it filled with who they're choosing, and they're talking about who they're going to choose and who won, who lost. It consumes their whole life. And what's the first thing they try to do? This one fella, years ago when fantasy football first came out, a guy in Florida tried to recruit me to play fantasy football. I was in California. I got better things to do. But that consumed his whole life. So guess what vine he was tapped into? Guess what fruit he bore? I knew another individual that had a potty mouth. And they weren't happy unless they could use the most foul language the most often they could at every opportunity, no matter what was going on. And guess what? They were not happy until they could draw other people into that same type of speech. And they would laugh and have so much fun. Guess what vine they were tapped into? Guess what fruit they bore? Oh, I knew this other, and I hate to do the stereotypical woman, but she was a gossip. I'm sorry, but it was a real life story. And this gal was not happy until she told everything that she knew to every person she knew about every person she knew. I've known some men like that too. Guess what vine she was tapped into? The grapevine, but not the right one. There are a lot of false vines, aren't there? I knew this one individual who always seemed to wake up on the wrong side of the bed. Doesn't matter what day, doesn't matter what was going on, always woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I suggested they moved it to the other side of the room. Picture them. They're up against the wall. Put it across. Yeah. Okay. No matter what went on, again, it was always negative. Everything they saw was negative. Everything they looked at was bad. Nothing was ever done right. And they turned into the other friend that I have that was super critical. Their whole attitude about everything was how it was wrong and how they would have done it better had they thought it necessary that they get involved. Guess what vine they were tapped into? Guess what fruit they bore? You see, there are false vines out there in which people draw from and then participate in and bring others into it as well. You know, there are even those who attempt to find eternal security in physical things, whether it's human philosophy, or whether it's their own thinking or their own devised salvation plan. I have my own opinions about the afterlife. There are a lot of false vines out there trying to redirect people to get from that vine the wrong thing. And Jesus battled with this all the time. And frankly, he knew that all those that came even after his disciples would need to battle that with. Don't each one of us have our own vines that tempt us to participate in, that try to draw us away from that? Maybe it's our own weakness. Sometimes I know as I get older, I sometimes become controlled. My attitude, my thinking, my reasoning becomes controlled by how I'm feeling physically. And you get up in the morning and you, you know. And the first thing I say to people is not good morning, it's what? There are many different false vines that are out there, and they come in different forms, not just religious forms, but also in irreligious forms, things of this world that just do their best to try to draw you into. But Jesus said, I am the true vine. I am the true vine. Now, Paul told the church at Rome, he used this analogy with regard to those who choose not to participate with the true vine. They want to claim it, but they choose not to draw from and participate with that true vine. In the book of Romans, Paul taught that the Jews at one time, remember, go back to Jeremiah, the Jews at one time decided that they would no longer believe God. They would follow their own vine. And God took second place, third place, fourth place, to the point where he didn't exist at all. Same like we're tempted to do at times. And so Paul said, you know what? And he used an olive tree this time. And he said, you know what God did with Israel? He took their branch off. They decided not to believe and follow and participate in the things of God, so God simply removed their branch. Fine, you don't want to participate. You ever had those trees? What do you do? We got some trees out here that are not doing what they're supposed to. What do you do with the branches that stop producing leaves and fruit? Yeah, cut them off. They're not good for anything anymore. They're more damaging than anything else. And that's what God did with Israel. And then he did something else. By their unbelief, he made his gospel known to the whole world, and he took another branch and he grafted it into the main. And that's what Romans chapter 11 talks about. And he brought the Gentiles into the truth of the gospel. And they're probably every one of us in this room are thankful that we've been grafted in. Don't get cocky about it, because he can remove our branch and put another one in. And Paul said that. But if we do not draw from the true vine, we're drawing from a false vine, and as far as the true vine is concerned, we're dead. What is it that determines that we're dead? We no longer do what? Bear the fruit that comes from the vine. We no longer produce that which God expects. You ever stop and think God expects something from you? Oh, I don't like that, David. Sometimes. God expects something from me? You're kidding. I thought the salvation stuff was free and we got it and we could just go on with life. I thought we just had to, do some special kind of activity and go through this motion stuff. And once I did all the physical things, then I'm good to go. Or if I pay enough money, in my offering plate, God's like, we're good. No, it's not. God has expectations of me. Husbands and wives, do you have expectations of your children? Or did you? Should you have had more? I can think of that about my children. Maybe I should have had more expectations. Maybe that's what my parents said about me. God has expectations from us. You know what those expectations are? Turn in your Bible to Galatians chapter 5. Turn in your Bible to Galatians chapter 5. Paul is talking to the churches, because the letter that he wrote in the book, just to clarify, the book of Galatians was written to a number of churches in an area that was called Galatia. Okay? Thus Galatians. Not to a specific church like the church of Corinth was written in Corinthians. So as he wrote to these folks, he was concerned at first. If you get to the first part in chapter 1, Paul says, I'm really surprised at you folks, because I had better expectations of you. I paraphrase a little bit. He says, I'm surprised that you have so quickly turned from the gospel in which I preached to you, and have turned to another gospel, which is no gospel at all. In other words, you have attached yourself to a vine that is not the true vine. And thus you're not producing the fruit that you ought to produce. The fruit you ought to produce, Paul goes on to explain to them in chapter 5. The fruit of the Spirit is, what's the first one in the list of the fruit of the Spirit? Love. Love is what the Spirit of God, when you are attached to the true vine, to Jesus Christ, you bear the fruit of love. You cannot help it. It is natural in the relationship between the branch and the vine. Because the vine is what feeds the branch. If we are not producing love, joy, peace, patience, what are they all? Faithfulness, godliness, gentleness, self-control, all of these, and there's one more I missed. Goodness, kindness. If these things are not being produced on a regular part of our life, we might ask the question, to what vine have we tapped into? Come this spring, what are they going to do to get maple syrup? Tap the oak trees?
Maple syrup.
You got to tap a maple tree to get maple sap, right? To make maple sugar. If you want to get Christianity, you got to tap in to Christ. You see? He is the true vine. So when we find ourselves producing oak sap, when we're supposed to be producing maple sap, so to speak, maybe we shouldn't try to be a sap at all. Another bad joke. But think about it. When we are having trouble producing the fruit that we are supposed to produce, we need to ask ourselves the question, to what are we tapped into? The book of James talks about, in chapter 3, can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? Doesn't work, does it? Because what comes out is what is in it. So what are you tapped into? Can a fig tree bear olives? Or a grapevine bear figs? Can't. Because it's going to produce what's natural to it. So what is natural to you? What is natural to the Spirit when we're tapped into the true vine, Jesus Christ, are the fruit that comes from the Spirit doing its work. Because the Spirit is the sap. What did God tell Noah to do after he got out of the boat? Let the animals out too. I mean, that's probably one of the first things. They probably didn't have to be told that because it was probably getting pretty strong in there by then. But he said, go forth, be fruitful, and multiply and replenish the earth. He was to go out and say, make more Noahs. Make more righteous men before the Lord. Make more faithful people to God. Make more Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Make more. Replenish the earth. So not only are we to, if we're tapped into the vine, supposed to produce this good fruit that the Spirit produces in our life, but it also drives us to continue to make more of us. So if we're not making more of us, we need to ask the question of to what have I been tapped into? Maybe I've been tapped into the vine of shyness. Maybe I've been tapping into the vine of embarrassment. Maybe I've been tapping into the vine of pride that I don't want to be looked like a believer of God. Maybe I've been tapped into I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. Maybe we're tapped into a vine that says we're more important than the message that should be natural to us to share. Because God expects an increase. Remember the parable Jesus told in Matthew chapter 26. Right after the brides, the 7 virgins. 12. 10. And, anybody wait? You remember? How many?
10.
Thank you. All right, so right after that, Jesus said to one guy, he gave 10 what? He gave one guy 10 what? 10 talents. Another guy, he gave 5 to another one, and left. Do you think he left with expectations or without? With expectations. In fact, that was borne out by the guy that got 2 later on in the story. So the guy with 10, he comes, he comes back, he gave talents, he comes back to the one with 10, he says, what happened while I was gone? He said, I brought you 20. Doubled it. I brought an increase. Doubled it. It's great. Goes to the one with 5. What have you done? What did he say? Here's 10. Went to the one with 2. What did the guy with 2 say? Oh, you had big expectations. You're a pretty hard guy, so I buried it so I didn't lose what I had. Here you go. And those 2 were taken and given to the one with 10. Because when you're faithful with what God gives you, He gives you more. When you're unfaithful with what God gives you, you are taken from what you have. Or what you have is taken from you. So this is the concept we need to get as Christians. If we do not bear fruit, if we do not begin to bear the fruit of love, joy, peace. If these things do not happen within us, then we're not tapped into the vine. And we need to get tapped into the vine that the Spirit can produce these things in our life in order that we can multiply. Because if you don't love somebody enough to risk harming their feelings rather than harming their soul, and frankly, it's a lie that Satan put in your head that you're going to hurt somebody's feelings by telling them about Christ. I'm going to lose my friend. They're going to think weird of me. No, they might even think that, you know what, you're a person who stands for what you believe in. I can look up to that. Or they can look at you and say, well, your religion doesn't mean much to you because you haven't shared it with me. You see how Satan twists our thinking? And we tap into the wrong vine. Jesus said to his disciples, I am the true vine. There's false ones out there. How are you going to know? Look at the fruit that you're bearing. And if you're bearing the wrong fruit, then get connected. So, when we conclude this series on who Jesus said he was, he is the light of the world. So what do we need to do? We need to take Jesus around. We need to take a flashlight, the spiritual flashlight. That's Jesus. We need to take his word around so that he can open the gate. He is the gate. Right? He is the shepherd that will feed. But we got to give people the food. We got to give people the word so they can be fed. That's why people are spiritually dying out there, is because nobody's feeding them. But we don't want to hurt their feelings. Why aren't we bolder? We're not bolder because we don't love like we ought to. Think about it. Go back in life. You put your baby in the high chair. Right? Take the baby, put him in the high chair, strap him in so they can't get out, slide out the bottom. You put a tray in front of them. And oftentimes they're screaming while you're doing it. Right? And then you get out that little jar of orange nasty stuff. Right? And you pop that open and you get the itty bitty spoon and you do the craziest things in the world to attempt to get this screaming, spitting up baby to ingest this nasty, stinky orange stuff into their body because one reason: you love them. And the things you go through with that baby because you love them, and you risk being hated to do the best for them and give them everything they need. See, that's the kind of love we need to have for our neighbors. That's the kind of love that we need to have for family when we get older. That's the kind of love we need to have for our enemies. Wow. That's the kind of love God had when he gave us his son, Jesus Christ. Are you tapped into that, right? Gracious Heavenly Father. Oh, that we would draw only from you. Father, we're fickle people. And we like to spread our branches and attempt to attach ourselves to other things. But Father, give us a unified, singular mind to recognize that there is one true vine, and that we might tap into your Son for all things and bear the fruit of your Spirit so that we can multiply and fill this world with more of the fruit of the Spirit, those who might grow in those things. Father, put that upon us. Father, expect it of us. You already do. Father, help us to appreciate that expectation, that we might go forth, be fruitful, multiply and replenish through the next generation this world. We thank you for this opportunity we have to study your word, to get reacquainted with the truth, so that our vine will not be stripped and our branch will not be thrown into the fire. We thank you. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. If you've been attached to the wrong vine and need to get reattached, if we can be helpful in that, maybe you've never attached at all, and you need to get attached and be grafted in. We sing a song of decision. If you need to make a decision in your life and you would like the church to participate in that decision and to help you along and encourage you, please step forward and let that decision be known, that we might be helpful. Our song of decision, 172. Would you stand with me as we sing?